Coming up on this week's show, the hottest mobile game comes to your old PC.
A new mouse for your Amiga.
And we chat about the retro magazine revival with our expert panel.
The Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each week with our friends at Bitmap Books. Now, if you're a fan of beat-em-up games, you need to check out Go Straight, the ultimate guide to side-scrolling beat-em-ups, covering 37 years of that incredible genre. You can find out more about that and order right now on their website at bitmapbooks.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 316, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And great to have you joining us for another nostalgia-filled show where we bring you up to speed on all the big stories from the last 7 days in the world of retro gaming and technology. And of course, we bring you a very special guest as well. I've got to say, I had to kind of pinch myself and look at what year it is, because on my table in front of me right now, I've got 4 magazines, one of which covers the Amiga, one that covers the Sega Mega Drive, the Dreamcast, and the Master System, another one with Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and a BBC Micro on the cover called Pixel Addict. Paper is hot again right now.
Yeah, and this week's episode's really hot as well. We're going to be talking about the kind of retro magazine revival that's going on at the moment, and it's absolutely mental. You know, we were at the Doncaster video game event, and we saw Amiga Addict there, but also Sega Powered and Pixel Addict. And these are all new magazines. So it's amazing to kind of go to this show and see the new magazines there. And we thought, why not get these people on the show to talk about this kind of retro magazine revival that's been happening? Because these specialist magazines are something that we massively miss. And getting them today, even in retail stores, which is going to be happening. It's really interesting.
Now, a little disclaimer, Ravi does actually work for Amiga Addict magazine, obviously, but I'm sure a lot of people know. And this is, because I used to read all the big Amiga mags back in the day, stuff like Amiga Format, CU Amiga. I would religiously get these with my pocket money. And, often I'd spend all my money on them. Amiga Shopper I used to get as well, Games Master magazine. So back then, it was kind of like the only way before the internet was widespread that you could find out what was going on. Of course, those cover discs as well. I used to live for those back then. And you're right. Because when we were at the Doncaster Gaming Market, I was actually going through a few of the old mags. But I've got to say, these new ones, like Sega Powered as well, which, is a new Sega magazine on issue 2 right now, covering all the classic Sega consoles. When you read these, it does kind of take me back to being like 12 years old again, sitting in my bedroom, on my bed, like reading the latest gaming mags. It really does feel like a throwback to that era.
Yeah, and it's becoming hugely popular. Like at the moment, we've got an article that's being written by The Guardian, and they're talking about all the different magazines and the kind of revival scene. And it's really interesting because, Sega Powered's been one that's been kickstarted, and so is Amiga Addict, and it's kind of having these kickstarted magazines. There's also a lot of other magazines out there. So this week we're going to be mainly talking with Sega Powered editor Dean Mortlock, also magazine expert from Maximum Power Up. Now, Maximum Power Up is a really good podcast where they've probably interviewed the most magazine guests that you've ever heard of. So that's a real kind of specialist one, and that's Paul Monaghan. And we'll be talking to the new deputy editor of Amiga Addict and Pixel Addict, which is Ian Griffiths. And I used to be the deputy editor, but he's taken my role. So I'm going to try and remain neutral in this one and not give him any hassle.
You didn't get sacked, did you, Ravi? He hasn't kicked you
No,
out.
No, I didn't get sacked. I'm still writing for Amiga Addict. I just reduced my role a little.
But yeah, I'm loving having these magazines out there again. I think it's going to be really interesting to kind of find out what goes into this, because one thing that always blows my mind about Amiga Addict is the fact that it's actually made on Amigas.
Yeah, it's made on Amigas, but it's also made completely collaboratively and virtually. So we hadn't met in person until last weekend, and it's the same with Sega Powered as well. A lot of these projects have been enabled by the internet, and people being able to create it, edit it, create teams, send it out, have collaborators, and also have it, collaboratively done and printed as well.
Yeah, so it's incredible. So we're going to find out what goes into kickstarting and getting a retro magazine back onto the market in 2022 with our expert panel coming up on the show in around half an hour from now. I've got to say as well, I mean, going to the Doncaster Gaming Market last weekend, Joe and I had a drive up on Saturday morning for a couple of hours. You know, you had to get back for the kid, had to get back for the dog, but we had a couple of hours where we just kind of went round. And I've just been out there again and retro gaming shopping and going to an event for the first time in 2 years. It just felt like a return to normal. It was so much fun.
It was a lot of fun, and it did feel like a massive return to normal. But what I did just notice that we were joint at the hip the entire thing, because a couple of us popped down. Ravi went down with the Amiga Addict guys the night before, and then you were kind of like working at the event. But we went down with some other friends as well, and they just dispersed to get the deals as soon as we got there. But me and Dan, we kind of clung on to each other because it was so busy. Like, don't lose each other, let's go around together. But it was amazing, and it was, I mean, it might have had something to do with the fact that I was with Dan, but it was amazing the amount of people that stopped us and spoke to us about the podcast and stuff like that. And, you know, even a lot of patrons who, you know, we've never met in person before, which was really like, I kind of felt a bit starstruck when I met a couple of people, because I was just like, oh my God, like I talk to you every month for Patreon and meeting you in person now. So it was just a really, really fun, cool experience. And like you say,
it was really nice. Again. It was really nice to see kind of community as well. So like I bumped into a lot of people from my Amiga user group as well. There were a lot of magazine people, just a lot of people, a few YouTubers there and stuff. And we picked up some bargains as well. I got an extremely weird joypad for you, Joe.
Yeah, the Nintendo Vortex tilt controller. Which
have you figured out what that does yet?
Yeah, it's a flight simulator controller for the Nintendo 64 and steering wheel controller. So it's got like it's it's a bit ahead of its time, but it's got like tilt controls in it. But it's got like a base that you stick the controller to, and the only way I can describe the controller is it looks extremely similar to a Jaguar controller, but with N64 buttons on it, and then it fixes quite nicely into the base that then has, you know, like the sticky ploppy things on the bottom to stick to your desk.
You haven't licked them, have you?
No, I haven't. No, luckily. It was still sealed, so the box isn't sealed, but it's in pretty good condition, but the actual controller itself was sealed, and I unsealed it and opened it on our most recent hangout on Sunday night just gone. So I've yet to use it, but yeah, really, really cool find and really nice gift from Ravi. As soon as we arrived, Ravi was just like, I found the most awesome thing for you, Joe. Here it is.
I also bought myself a copy of My Horse and Me for the Wii, which I was very excited about.
Yeah, and then took a picture of me holding it and said that it was my game.
Joe's favourite title.
And I came home with their 2 Mega Drives, even though I already had one at home. Because I didn't have a Mega Drive 2, and I saw one for £30, and I thought, the Mega Drive 2 looks kind of cute. So I'll get one of those. And then I went around the corner and a guy was selling a Japanese Mega Drive. Obviously got the purple logo and the biggest 16-bit font. And I remember seeing that in game shops when I was a kid and thinking how much cooler it looks. I thought, I need one of those in my collection as well. So now I'm sitting next to, I've got them all set up on my table, 3 Mega Drives.
It shows that bargains are still there to be had. It shows, aren't they?
It does actually. Well, yeah absolutely. So. But what made me laugh is as soon as Dan picked them up, he said, I should really get a Sega CD too now. And he was like, if we can, and we did find one, but it was boxed and it was like £200. And you were like, no, if we can find one unboxed, we'll grab it. But yeah, that just made me laugh. How as soon as you picked them up, you were like, I need a Sega CD too, straight away.
I think it's because we haven't been to, retro gaming market for so long. I was just like, right, okay, just let's spend and let's buy some.
This is my only opportunity.
I know. Well, you two were like the devil on my shoulders because I didn't spend any money right until like the last kind of 20 minutes. And we were there for like a good 3 hours, but in the last 20 minutes, I kind of ran around everything I wanted and grabbed it. But yeah, you two are you're a bad influence on me.
That's what your wife said.
Yeah.
So if you came along and said hello to us at the Doncaster Gaming Market, it was great to meet a bunch of listeners there as well. So roll on the next event, and lots more hopefully coming up this summer. Now the world's starting to get over COVID at least. There's lots more going on. We won't get into that though. Let's have happy thoughts on this week's show. That's what this show's all about: escapism and talking about things that we love. So lots of news stories to get into this week. Now, this is quite interesting. Power Slave Exhumed. Now, I wasn't too familiar with this game, but this looks well up your street, Joe. This is a classic 90s shooter that's got a retro remaster.
Yeah, man. So Power Slave Exhumed. So there's quite a big history with Power Slave and Exhumed, isn't there, Ravi? But essentially, it's a Doom clone from 1996 that's been remastered. But in America, the game was called Power Slave, but in Europe, the game was called Exhumed. So the re-release, they've just called it Power Slave Exhumed, which makes sense.
You know why that was?
It's because of the engine, the game engine.
Well, also because the US title was in reference to Iron Maiden.
There you go.
Iron Maiden album, which was known as Power Slave.
Oh, there you go. There we go. Fact of the day from Ravi.
Which had an Egyptian theme as well, which is kind of book.
Yeah.
This game is based on.
Yeah. So essentially, it was a PC game in, I think, 95, 96. And then it got ported to the Saturn and the PlayStation, which were very similar to the PC port, but also very different. But essentially, it's a Doom clone first-person shooter, but it uses fully 3D rendered graphics with 2D sprites. And it was done by Lobotomy Software, who went on to do, they worked on a lot of the Duke Nukem games. And I feel like did they work on Quake as well?
Yeah, so this was based on the Build engine, which was kind of the rival to Doom at the time, by Ken Silverman. So this was based on the same engine that Duke Nukem 3D was on.
Yeah, and the engine is called the Power Slave engine, isn't it?
I'm not sure. I know it was just Build, but it was 3D Realms that kind of started to work with it, and the idea was that it would really show the power off of the Build engine, and this is very similar to a lot of kind of other Build titles that came out, like Blood and stuff like
Shadow
that.
Warrior,
But it did and Shadow Warrior, but it did really well on the consoles as well, which was quite surprising for this because it seemed like a very PC kind of title. Yeah,
so they weren't the most solid ports. They did generally run at 30 frames per second, but they had a couple of issues, and the Saturn version of the game looked very wide, like big open corridors and big open areas for it to kind of work. And then the PlayStation was a little bit more like the PC version. It was a bit tighter, but slightly better graphics. But the Saturn had like nicer lighting in it, and apparently more dynamic lighting. But essentially, this remaster is very similar to the Quake remaster that we covered a couple of months ago. It's just a beautiful HD remake. Not remake, but HD remaster, which has been redone by Night Dive Studios, who have redone, a lot of these shooters recently. But the kind of the look of the game, it's out on, Xbox One, PS5, PS4, and obviously on PC. It looks, I don't know if you guys have watched any of the footage of it or anything like that, but it's very similar to, to the Quake remake. It's that beautiful old school look, but just with like amazing graphics.
So it's in higher resolution, and like it's basically a combination of the PlayStation version and the Saturn version. So they didn't directly kind of change the maps or anything like that to be like the PlayStation version. They combined both of them, so there's a lot of like the geometry's been combined and stuff. So it's actually quite a unique experience, and you had two endings at the end of the game as well. So it's kind of depending on the choices that you made in the game, you would be presented with a different ending. So I think this is actually going to be quite a unique experience. It's like for fans, I'm sure they play the Saturn version, PlayStation version, and notice all the differences. But this having them combined together is a really good idea. And with the Build engine as well, it was always an engine that could be changed and have extra resolution in there, but it could also have like polymorph technology. I remember they used to do really crazy mods of Duke Nukem 3D where it just looked really high end in the graphics, and this kind of seems similar. It's also got better lighting, and there's a lot more kind of 3D-ness to the environments.
Yeah, they've also gone back and like, the sprites, the 2D sprites of the enemies, they've got that really nice hand-drawn, pixel-perfect look to it now. And obviously, it wouldn't be a retro game remastered without all the filters as well. Like, so a lot of the reviews are saying like, the CRT, like the classic CRT filter on it is really nice, and you can really kind of play around with the settings, and you can kind of try and make it look a little bit more like the Sega Saturn version, and you can make it look a little bit more like the PlayStation version, and to a point where you can even kind of play around with the pixel size on the screen.
Yeah, you can like turn off the anti-aliasing as well, and you know, if you want to remove those kind of perfections and stuff that have been done, you can reduce it down to lower quality. I don't know why you want to, though. This looks beautiful.
for the nostalgia, Ravi.
Yeah.
I do love the fact, though, that because it does look like a mid-90s shooter, but on like the PlayStation 5, it runs at, pretty much 4K. And 60 frames a second, but with like mid-90s visuals. It's very cool. Because I did, when I went away in December, we went to a cottage up in North Yorkshire. I was talking about in the show at the time for my birthday. Took the dog up there. It was literally middle of nowhere. We had no phone signal, no Wi-Fi, anything. But I brought my Switch there, and I was just playing Quake on it on the TV in the cottage. You're like, whenever Samantha was upstairs having a bath or whatever, or getting ready to go out, I'd spent hours on that game over the weekend. And actually, it was really quite nice because it kind of reminded me of, because when I play video games now, you've always kind of got your phone nearby and you stopping to check Twitter or Facebook or your email, or always getting a bit distracted by something, but it was actually nice. It reminded me of gaming back in the 90s, the fact that I was fixated on the screen and there was no distractions around at all. So that was quite cool, actually. So I'm quite liking this FPS revival, these retro shooters that are coming out again. So this one's available now on PlayStation, Xbox, and Switch and PC as well. So you can get a hold of it. And it does look like one. I didn't play this back in the day, but it looks like a really atmospheric game.
If you fancy that kind of Egyptian vibe in there, and Doom set in hell, this is set in kind of an Egyptian city. It's really cool, and I always liked how they kind of themed it, and it just seemed really nicely done.
It's one of them. They always have the really fun, over the top weapons as well. Like Doom and Hexen and Quake and all of them as well. So if you're itching for one of those kind of classic 90s 2D first person shooters, then Power Slave Exhumed is definitely the one.
Well, there is something a lot of people seem to be very keen to get hold of at the moment. Not only in this new Kickstarter that's running right now, but obviously we've got the Amiga Classic, the A500 Mini that's coming out very soon, that actually comes with a USB version of the classic Amiga tank mouse. And I've been seeing people going wild for this on Facebook groups and everything, like, are they going to be selling the tank mouse separately? I want a USB version of it. I can't wait. And now there is a Kickstarter. Someone is doing a wireless optical version of the Amiga tank mouse. And this thing at the moment, it's got around, at the time of recording this, around 25 days left to go. The one around £65,000 on Kickstarter. They're at 41,000, so it's getting there. And this is pretty much just that, something that will work on your modern machine, on your Mac, your Linux desktop, your Windows machine, and it is a wireless optical version of the old school mouse that you got with your Amiga 500.
Yeah, it will work on both. So it's by a guy called Lucas Remis, and the idea is, it is wireless, but what I love about it is it has two modes. So it has the 2.4 gigahertz, which is kind of supported using a little DB9 adapter. So I've actually got a wireless keyboard in my Amiga at the moment. You can get these little adapters that you put the DB9 in, and then you put the little kind of wireless transmitter in there, and that hooks up to your Amiga, or I'm sure it would work with an Atari or any of the old school system, and you can use that. And that means you'll be able to use this mouse on the Classic, and it's actually a stretch goal to create a native Amiga DB9 wireless receiver. So at the moment, that's not something that's connected to the project, but you might need that if you want to use it on the Classic system. But then it has a little switch on the bottom. So you go, okay, I'm not using it on my Classic system. I want to go to Bluetooth, and I want to use it on my new computer. Then you just switch on the bottom, you change into Bluetooth mode. And I think that's a really awesome kind of way of using it. So you can use it on your Classic and your kind of new school stuff. But also it's got a few little functions in there, which the previous ones didn't have. So it's got this mouse scrolling ability. There was never that middle scroller on the mouse. And the way that this is designed is it's actually, in the middle of the tank mouse. So you move your finger up and down, and
like a Mac Magic Mouse.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And then that's used for scrolling. Now, scrolling isn't supported that well in the Amiga, so you might have to get one of the latest operating system versions or install a third-party one. But I can imagine if you're using this on, like, a Mac or on a modern computer, that scrolling would be absolutely essential. And looking at the price of it, it's quite a decent, €36 for the white version.
You know what, though? Because, and I think this is really interesting, the fact that everyone's been going so wild about the tank mouse again. And I know, actually, I think Amiga kit sell like a conversion kit where you can actually,
I think there's a laser one. So what you can do is you can take the mouse ball out and then change it so it's a kind of optical laser mouse.
But my memory is that the first thing anyone would do when you got an Amiga back in the early 90s was to instantly throw that mouse in the bin and buy a better one because it was crap. I just don't remember anyone liking it.
I had a laser one. Yeah, I had a laser and I chucked that one out. But the thing is, you'd spend most of the time cleaning your mouse ball, wouldn't you? And you don't have that problem with this.
Well, I used to get, the Logic 3 speed mouse. That was always the one that I replaced the tank mouse with. And I've still got a bunch of them on all my Amigas now. I think the tank mice actually breed. So I opened my cupboard the other day and I've got about 8 in there, and I don't know where they've all come from.
There was only 2 originally.
Yeah, really weird. But it's funny though, isn't it? The fact that, something that people back when it was actually out and a thing, everyone complained about it and hated it. Now suddenly everyone's really nostalgic for it.
Yeah, and I always found they were really nice mice, but the weight, I didn't like the weight on it. I didn't feel it was weighted down enough. Now this has 2 AA batteries in there, so maybe that will help with the weight, or maybe I'll put some lead inside mine or something.
I just found them hideously
really
uncomfortable, that weird angle. I thought it never was that nice on your hand. And the biggest complaint I had with the originals were the buttons would always fail on them for me, which I imagine these new designs, that they're going to have decent buttons on them. Not something, I think, some of mine didn't even have micro switches, and it was just kind of, those little kind of metal domes with a bit of sellotape over them. Really cheap.
And I can imagine with this DB9, you can use it for pretty much like any system that's going to take that, which is pretty awesome. You'll be able to use it on your old school, I don't know, maybe Mega Drive if you had a kind of game that supported it.
It'll take a lot to convince me that the tank mouse is decent, but I think, looking at this, I am quite tempted to give it a try. Maybe it can win me over after about 30 years. So, it is very cool to see it. A new wireless Amiga mouse on the market. So if you want to back that on Kickstarter, I'll link it up in our show notes along with everything else at theretrohour.com. Now, we did have our patrons hang out on Sunday night. Oh, that was so much fun, wasn't it?
Oh, man, absolutely loved it. We had quite a few new people on, and quite a few people... Yeah. From across the pond in America, which was really cool, and they all understood the initiation, and showed off their kind of new pickups and their game rooms and some absolutely amazing stuff. But we were all quite reserved after the Doncaster market and didn't buy anything on this week's hangout. But yeah, it was a really good one, really nice busy one again.
So this is what we do. One Sunday every single month, we all get together on a Sunday evening around 8 p.m. UK time. A bunch of us all get on Google Meets. We'll have a bit of a chat just about anything retro. I think, this week we're talking about DJ setups for a bit, and we're talking about EverDrives and microphones we were talking about for a while, and disco lighting. It was all kinds of stuff. And obviously we show off our retro gaming pickups and, some obscure systems. I think we were talking about the TI-99 this week, weren't we? Which was something I knew, the Atari 400 as well. That's the thing, though, when I'm on these hangouts, because I think I've got a pretty decent retro system collection, I suddenly realise, I haven't got one of those.
Well, it's when the Americans come on and they say, oh, this was popular, or we've got loads of these around, and then Dan's suddenly like drooling, going, oh.
Yeah, I need an Apple IIc, looks nice. So it can be a bit dangerous these, but I must admit, I've been on eBay this week looking for those. But this is what we do every month. If you'd like to come and join us for the next one, all you got to do is back us on Patreon. And that's the reason that we do Patreon, really, just to keep the show going. And, we have a bit of a community going around it as well. So if you ever, if you enjoyed this show and you want to kind of throw something into the tip jar, as it were, to help us with the running costs of it and everything else, back us on Patreon. You get invited to the hangout. We also do a bonus patrons exclusive podcast for our gold members and above called the Retro Hour After Hours, of which we'll be doing a new episode of in the next few weeks. You get the normal show ad-free, get it early some weeks as well. But really, the reason that you're backing us on Patreon is to keep this podcast going each week and have the honour of knowing that it's thanks to you that this podcast comes out every single Friday. And let's give a huge thank you to our latest patron who signed up this week, Christopher Evans. Thank you so much for your support. And if you'd like to join him, all the details are at theretrohour.com. Now, it does feel like every week Joe's like, I've had another Resident Evil story. It's like, are they just on a mission to like remake everything that ever happened with Resident Evil at the moment?
You know what? You would think that, Resident Evil was like my favorite game series of all time, like classic Resident Evil. You think that I'm like in some sort of forum with them constantly, like a Discord, getting notifications like, Resident Evil's been mentioned on the internet, but no, just keeps coming up in like, retro game news. But Capcom, have recently updated a bunch of assets for some of the classic Resident Evil titles, and it's got a lot of people talking, a lot of fans talking, including myself, obviously, because I'm talking about it now. But essentially, on the Japanese Resident Evil website, which is the Biohazard portal, because obviously it's called Biohazard in Japan, they've updated the history section. Now, I can't navigate the website because I don't speak Japanese. There's only a little bit of English.
You could have gone to the effort of learning it before this week's show.
I could have done. But essentially, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil Outbreak, and Outbreak File 2 have all had quite a few bits in the history section updated. And when I say bits, they've updated like the posters, the artwork, and also quite a lot of the enemy models. So in the history section, from what I understand, and you get this in a lot of the modern Resident Evil games, you can kind of go in and look at the enemies and like, in like a camera mode and like spin the enemies around and look at all the details and stuff like that. And essentially what people have noticed, what fans have noticed, is they've updated this, but with high-res HD versions of the enemies and characters from Resident Evil Code Veronica, Outbreak, and Outbreak File 2. So, and it's not just an upscale, it's not just a touch up, it's like beyond upscaling. Like they've really, really upscaled some of these assets. And
they've worked on them well. It's not just kind of AI detection. They do look notably different. And they're also saying that there was this huge leak with NVIDIA as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
there was a leak with NVIDIA, which I think we touched on a little bit a couple of months ago, last year, where there was this leak where, a lot of these Capcom games are meant to be coming in. In that leak, there was a remake of Chrono Cross, the sequel to Chrono Trigger, and Street Fighter 6, which have since been announced in the last couple of weeks. And in there was points about Resident Evil remakes, i.e. Outbreak and Code Veronica. So fans are speculating that they're gearing up to announce, the remasters of these games, which I'm all for. And I would love an Outbreak remaster, because Outbreak was the multiplayer online one for PlayStation 2, which didn't get supported in the UK because obviously we didn't really have a widespread PlayStation Online, whereas they did in Japan. And they play Outbreak. Resident Evil Outbreak is classic Resident Evil. It plays like classic Resident Evil, but it was like free player online with you like running around in scenarios. So it didn't have like a long campaign. It had like 6 levels, and each one was a scenario, like escape the city, escape the burning city, escape the lab. And, it didn't have headset support or anything like that. It was a little bit too old school for that. But you could, talk to each other on the D-pad, like, come over here and go over there, shoot that. And, it never came to the UK, and I always wanted it because the games came out in the UK, but you could just play them on one player with computer AI, and they'd be like blocking doors for you and stuff like that. But you're just like, I wish this was my mates. Like
that sounds ideal, kind of for today's modern consoles. And just even looking at it here, they're saying Outbreak also had the ability for players to create their own games, so it could be a bit like a Resident Evil Mario Maker.
Yeah, that would be, I'd absolutely love that. That would be amazing. And also what was really cool about Outbreak is if you died on the online mode, your character did become a zombie and start running around as a zombie. So, and Code Veronica, a lot of people say, is the real Resident Evil 3. That was what Resident Evil 3 should have been. I mean, I love Resident Evil 3, but, it makes sense with the success of Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, and there's still rumours of there being a proper Resident Evil 4 remake. I know we got the Oculus Quest version of it recently, but it does seem like the natural progression, and these games, I feel like, do need more love because they are like top tier Resident Evil games, so I'm all for it.
It's interesting because Code Veronica, I've played a bit. on the Dreamcast. It was kind of when I first got my Dreamcast. It was a load of, I think I just Googled like, the top 10 games and burnt them all to CD and played them. And, I know the original 2 Resident Evil games more because my brother had them on the PS1 when we were kids. But, Code Veronica seems to be, from looking at the comments on this Nintendo Life article, the one that most people seem to want to remake of.
Yeah, it really is kind of like the cult classic Resident Evil game. Like, everybody's like, oh yeah, the Holy Trinity, Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 for the PlayStation. But so many hardcore Resident Evil fans will be like, you need to play Code Veronica as well. But for me, Code Veronica is kind of like that turning point where Resident Evil kind of became a bit action fantastical, like,
less horror.
Yeah, less horror. I mean, there is obviously still horror elements there because there's zombies and everything, but even in the opening cinematics, like Claire Redfield, the main character, is like dodging bullets, and there's a point where she throws her gun down, drops her gun, because they're like hands up, but then she drops to the floor and catches the gun and shoots all the bad guys. So that's kind of where Resident Evil went, for about 10 years. But it was kind of like the last fixed camera Resident Evil classic style, with your 8 item slots and all the puzzles. Outbreak has got the classic kind of semi-fixed camera and, tank controls and stuff like that, but it wasn't as immersive or in-depth as kind of like the original trilogy because it was more of an online, you've got an hour to kind of escape the city, with your friends online, but obviously in the UK we just got the AI. So I don't know if they'll update that a little bit, but it would be really cool because of the most recent Resident Evil games have been really fun, but the online elements that they've kind of put with them haven't been quite what I think fans have been after, which is a completely different rabbit hole we can go down.
This sounds ideal for streaming. Like, I see so many people streaming Resident Evil speed runs. I can imagine 3 different streamers getting together and this being a huge game on Twitch.
Yeah, that didn't even cross my mind. I watch so many Resident Evil streams at night and stuff like that. Like, when I'm going to sleep, I just live and breathe Resident Evil. But I didn't even think of that because I follow several different streamers, and for them to have that ability to get together and play a classic Resident Evil game online like that would be absolutely amazing. We should do it, the 3 of us. Me just screaming at you both.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
You're doing it wrong. But apparently they're going to be updating the Resident Evil portal today at the time we're recording this, but I think it's like 2 a.m. in Japan now, so maybe by the time the show comes out there will be some
you know what? That always happens. Next week, hopefully, we'll be able to discuss the remakes that have been announced.
So, we'll link up that article if you want to check out more. Those character models do look like, they wouldn't have gone to all that effort, you wouldn't think, unless there was some like kind of reason behind it. So fingers crossed that is some good news. Now, do any of you guys play Wordle?
I'm dyslexic, so my life is Wordle. I've seen it and I don't understand it. It's just blocks of colours to me. But I do know it's massively popular, and I think good to anybody that plays it, because I love those kind of old magazine stuff, crosswords, and just kind of like simple games with words and stuff.
It is kind of the epitome of addictive, simplistic games, because it is. My missus actually got me into this. Actually, the game made me feel very stupid, because I think for about 5 days, I didn't get the word any single day last week. So what you do is it gives you a word every day and gives you a few clues to get the word, and then you kind of get 6 attempts to guess it, and if you get it wrong, it locks you out for 24 hours.
Okay.
But some of the words are like, I was looking at the other day, I put it on Twitter and just literally, I think it was trending like, what the hell does this word mean? I can't remember what it meant now. But I mean, because it's one of those games where sometimes they're the most popular, aren't they? Just simple, casual gamers, something like this where you can just, log on quickly on your lunch break or whatever and have a quick game. And it makes sense.
Look at Countdown. Countdown's still massively huge,
But yeah, so this game, it's now been ported to Windows 3.1, a version of it called Windle. So if you ever wanted to play the popular word game on your retro machine, you can now play it on, it's actually Windows 3.1 for work groups. Someone's got it running on here as well. So, I mean, looking at it, it kind of reminds me a bit. I mean, the user interface is that classic Win 3.1 look, stuff that you'd find in the Microsoft Entertainment Pack back then, stuff like Solitaire and Chips Challenge and everything as well. And there is a website called dialup.net/Windle where you can download it for free. And it is a kind of game that just lends itself well to these retro platforms.
Yeah, I've heard it's developed in Java as well. So, like, originally, it's just a Java site that somebody did, JavaScript, and then obviously it's been sold off, hasn't it, to New York Times? I saw that everywhere. So it's cool that there's...
And they've made it harder, I think. I think since they bought it. I could do it before, but now that's what I'm blaming.
Too academic for you. But I do remember these games on Windows 3.1. Now, one thing I've been trying to do is emulate Sim Tower. And Sim Tower is one of these games that you actually have to have a 3-point installation to actually launch the game. So you need to be able to launch up that old Windows environment and then launch Sim Tower within it. And there were a few games like that, actually. It was a quite interesting thing having that like interface. And of course, you'd have a Minesweeper as well and Pipe Dream and stuff like that.
Well, because this game's so simple, I mean, there are some comments here. I didn't realise there's a version of Wordle for the Commodore 64 and one for the BBC Micro as well, apparently. So it kind of reminds me
of the new Flappy Bird.
That's what I was going to say. It reminds me of that. These kind of really simplistic kind of, games that almost become memes, really, I suppose, to get spread that far. Seeing them on retro machines, because, they're graphically not demanding at all. So it makes sense that, it's going to be quite a simple job to kind of port these over to old school hardware. But it is very cool, though, that you can play these kind of addictive games on your old machines. It's one of the few times I've got my wife actually to play the Amiga when Flappy Bird came out on that. And it's one of those just one more go games.
I kind of love the fact that, we're in a world with you're getting huge gigabytes, 50 gig games to download and everything. And everyone's playing like Wordle or something really, Flappy Bird, something really simple. And that will have a lot more users and a lot more players than some of these new games and huge consoles.
Yeah, so if you want something new to play on your old F386, that's free to download, and I'll put that link along with the rest of the stories in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, let's just take a moment to give a big thank you to, of course, our regular sponsor, our amazing friends at Bitmap Books. Now, this new book here, let me just reach over and get it. 2 secs. I'm going to put this down, and hopefully it won't break my table in half. This is Go Straight, the ultimate guide to side-scrolling beat-em-ups, spanning 450 pages. And as soon as I saw this, I thought, Joe could probably read this in an afternoon. I know you're that into this genre.
I absolutely love it. And I really, really want my hands on this book. It looks absolutely amazing.
So this takes you through, the games that we all grew up playing, stuff like Double Dragon, Golden Axe, Final Fight, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, of course, Streets of Rage. Yeah. Even talking about, it kind of goes through the history of that genre. Over 200 games are featured in here, spanning 37 years, starting with Kung Fu Master back in 1984. That actually was the first game I remember playing on the NES when I was a kid. And that is still one of my favourite games, even though I'm rubbish at Kung Fu Master now. I don't think I didn't even get past the first level last time I played it.
I feel like we played it together at one of the Play Expo events, and we did terrible at it.
I think we had about 6 pints each.
Yeah, we
time,
well.
So I'll blame it on that. And then it kind of goes through, all those classic 80s and 90s brawlers, finishing off with, stuff like the latest indie titles like Streets of Rage 4 and Mother Russia Bleeds, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot in here. And of course, it's a Bitmap Books book, packed full of screenshots, sprites, level max, all lovingly curated and presented to their incredible high standards as well. So if you wanted a real love letter and a real celebration of those classic brawlers, this book is available now. Go Straight, the ultimate guide to side-scrolling beat-em-ups. You can get it right now on their website at bitmapbooks.co.uk. And of course, support the podcast by supporting our sponsors. And while we're speaking of that, supporting the podcast as well, actually, I just wanted to take a quick second to give a big thank you to a few people who've left a review on Apple Podcasts, because we do mention this from time to time, but these really do make a big difference to getting us in the podcast charts, don't they?
Totally, yeah. Like, Apple's the kind of primary format for podcasts, and having those reviews there are great. And, it just cheers us up as well. Seeing these, reviews, there's some really nice stuff on there.
Yeah, so I want to say a big thank you to Matt1610, iMac1, Drewster, Dunga105. Even Rick D, who, despite the fact he gives a bit of a scathing review, still gives us 5 stars. So we appreciate that, Rick. So if you'd like to leave us a little review on there, I mean, it helps us get in front of new people as well and get into the podcast charts each week. So if you can take a couple of seconds just to give us a nice little review and 5 stars, that does really help. Like Ravi said, in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I think do a little rating thing on there now as well. Stitcher do, reviews. So any platform you're on, if you can take a couple of seconds, that would really help us out. Right then, time to talk about the Retro Magazine revival. Talking about Sega Power Magazine, Amiga Addict, Pixel Addict, with our special guests, Paul Monaghan, Dean Mortlock, and Ian Griffiths are next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for the main bit of the show then, where we welcome on our special guests, as we have got 3 guests this week, and we're going to be talking about the revival of retro gaming magazines. I mean, I was saying at the start of the show, it feels like it's like 1995 or something again. These incredible paper mags I've got on my desk, Sega Power, Amiga Addict, Pixel Addict, and there's so many more as well. So I thought we'd welcome on, a few of the guys that actually work on these titles. So we've got Dean Mortlock, and we've got Paul Monaghan and Ian Griffiths. Welcome to the show, guys. Nice to have you on.
Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you.
Well, I mean, let's start with you, Dean. I mean, it might be quite interesting just to kind of get a bit of background on kind of what you're working on at the moment and what your kind of background is in the magazine industry.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's almost exactly 30 years since I started working in games journalism. I started working at Paragon when they were based in Trowbridge on a magazine called Console Access. I did the first 2 issues of that. Then I moved to Future to work on Sega Power, and I was there for 6 years. So I saw it through the kind of transition from being Sega Power into Saturn Power to eventually obviously closing it, killing it off. And then I went freelance for a number of years and did other things. But I've stayed in publishing for the last 30 years, but I haven't always been in games publishing. But very briefly, Paul and I have been in contact for a few years since we did a podcast for Maximum Power Up. And we've always talked about potentially doing another games mag. But it was only kind of really when Paul started working for Amiga Addict that I saw, okay, there's an opportunity here. So it kind of sprang on from there, really. And we had Mark, who's obviously Sega Mags, and we had Neil, who was on DC UK. So it kind of seemed the natural fit was to do a Sega Mag.
Well, this is obviously Sega Powered, which we'll go into in a bit more detail very soon. But I mean, Paul, you don't need any introduction, to the British podcast audience, I'm sure, Paul. I mean, you do your own podcast, Maximum Power Up, which, if you're into magazines, you do some of the most incredible interviews. All these guys I used to grow up reading, all these editors of magazines and famous journalists as well. I mean, what's kind of your, where do you come into all this, and why did you decide to really get into this magazine world then?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. That does mean a lot coming from you guys. Well, for myself, I've always been into games magazines from being a kid. It was a case of all my paper round money went on magazines at the end of each week. So rather than actually being paid in pounds and pence, it was always a case of probably left with about 20p left of my paper round wage, and I'd already had it on different magazines each week. And my aim as a kid was to try and write on games magazines. That never happened, sadly. Probably being a little bit lazy, in all honesty, but I still had that passion, for reading all about, these fantastic machines back in the late 80s, early 90s. And obviously spent many years in retail, working in game shops and things like that. But the main thing was, skipping forward lots of years, when I got back into retro gaming back in 2012, the main thing for me, more than the actual playing of the games, was reading the magazines again. So after skipping all my magazines back in 1999, apart from some super plays that I did keep, a few, and then was lucky enough to get a full set of them from a guy in Burnley back in 2004 for 35 quid. Sorry, pointless fact there. But it was a case of I need to get these magazines again. And this was just as the price of retro games were rising in 2012, 2013, but the magazines weren't, because I still managed to get, I think I mentioned to you when we saw you in person, Dan, managed to get the early issues of Mean Machine Sega for a penny each, issue 1 of Edge for a penny, because people weren't really looking at them at the time. And then that leads us to, well, over the last few years where print media has started making a comeback. There's lots of people roughly my age, like mid-40s and, well, above, who remember all these magazines. And there's obviously been a gap in the market, and that led to obviously doing the Maximum Power podcast. And my main thing there was to interview as many games writers as possible. So the likes of Jez Rignall, Neil West, Steve Jarrett, just the list goes on, names that we all remember, and then, as Dean mentioned, had him on the show back in 2017 when we were discussing Sega Power, and we met up in person for my 40th, a trip to Bath, and that's what I wanted to do for my 40th. I wanted to go down and see the old Future Publishing offices. My wife didn't come with me, which my friends thought was a bit strange. But anyway, I had a great time, obviously meeting up with a few ex-Games journalists and friends. And that's when we started knocking about the idea of a games magazine. A year later, I spoke to Jonah, editor of Amiga Addict, who liked my passion for when I spoke about magazines and started writing a little bit for that. And then myself and Dean and, like I say, Mark and Neil, we started work on a Sega Powered probably last summer, I think it was, when the first ideas really started to come together.
Well, I'm glad I'm not the only person who got rid of all my gaming mags and then started buying them all back again. I'm sure I've actually got some that are mine that people have dragged out of the skip and sold back to me in my room now, actually.
I've got half a dance here.
Yeah, I gave most of mine to Ravi, then bought them back, actually. And obviously, Ian, I mean, you've become the deputy editor of Amiga Addict magazine recently as well. And what was kind of your background with magazines then, and how did you lead to this point then?
So, I used to read a lot of magazines back in the 8-bit kind of Spectrum era and the 16-bit Amiga era through to the PC, and then I kind of stopped really. But so I've got a fair bit of sort of a consumer background with magazines, but I've never been in publishing myself or anything like that. But our editor Jonah Naylor, he approached me a couple of years ago now, asking whether I'd like to get involved with the magazine, whether I'd like to write a couple of articles, do a bit of proofreading. So I was happy to do that. Obviously, as these things always go, I joined the magazine and then grabbing myself a much larger role than I initially intended. But that's the way these things tend to go. I mean, Jonah had been subscribed to the German magazine Amiga Future for quite a few years before he started thinking about this. And he first had the idea of Amiga Addict a good few years actually before we even got together and started putting it together. But his feel was, and something that's been expressed to us by a few other people that have been involved, was that they like the type of content you get in things like Amiga Future, but it doesn't have that kind of British tone we understand and miss from those heady years in the 90s when you'd get that real kind of not so much lad culture, but definitely something that is uniquely British to feel to it, rather than something that's been translated from a different kind of language. So he said to me when his second child came along, he thought this is going to be his only chance to actually give this a go. So he's really driven it through, and I give him all the credit for that. But yeah, I've been on board since day one, and now I'm doing the deputy editor role, and it's all been going pretty well, to be honest.
Well, I'm going to ask a question of all of you guys, and first we'll start with Ian, actually. What was your favourite gaming magazine? So what was the one that you would actually save up for, or two of them, and have your dream kind of magazine and spend all your pocket money on it?
So, I mean, I started with Amiga magazines with Amiga Action, which I think is controversial to some people because I think it's got a mixed reception in the community. But I had that from before I even got my Amiga. I was back in the day when you'd buy the magazines and you'd just get yourself excited as a somebody in your early teens, just getting that hype up for getting your machine. I bought that for quite a long time, but Amiga format is really where it really the real love of the magazine's kind of honed into view, because that had that real professional style, and it covered just everything from games to hardware and everything like that.
Well, what about you, Dean, as well? I know you were working on them, but you must have wanted to purchase them as well.
Yeah, well, when I started computing, it was kind of with the Spectrum, so it was kind of things like Crash and your Sinclair. And then when I had my Amiga, it was kind of, I was more of an Amiga gamer, really. So it was kind of things like Amiga Power, the one. And then Mega, I was always a massive fan of Mega. I thought Mega was a great mag. Superplay was fantastic. Total was great. They all kind of captured exactly what they wanted to do, and they targeted the audience perfectly, I think. Me Machine Sega, I mean, I've got to be honest, I think there's a lot I liked about what they did, and they kind of, again, they just managed to create the perfect magazine for the audience they were going for.
I feel better now. I feel better now answering, seeing Dean's listed off a few, because I was like going, God, just one. Obviously, the main one for me is always going to be Superplay. Obviously, being a Super Nintendo owner as a teenager, Superplay, I loved the style. We always talk about the Will Overton artwork so much that for one time when I did meet him in person, I think I just wouldn't leave him alone for most of the afternoon at a games event. But then that's one that stands out. Then another one which doesn't get loads of love is still Games X, because it didn't last for that long, done by Europress, but that only lasted 48 weekly issues before it ended. But I was only 11 or 12 when that magazine ran, and the idea of a weekly games magazine, with the official charts and everything, was quite interesting, And then the other one is something that I did a recent feature for Amiga Addict, and that was Zero. And I think anyone who enjoyed like your Sinclair, when you moved on to the 16-bit era, your ST or Amiga, Zero was just one hell of a magazine. The writing talent they had, the humour. This is something that I've been fortunate enough to speak to a couple of guests for Maximum Power Up to discuss their time on Zero, and also, like I say, to do a good few pages writing about it. It's such a good magazine, and then I don't think it gets as much love as other ones. There's always things like Amiga Format always gets mentioned, which is, for good reason. But Zero never seems to be at the top of anyone's list. But those are probably my top three. And then later, when we start recording, I'll go, I can't believe we didn't mention this.
It's interesting because, a podcast reaches a global audience, but I think, in that kind of pre-internet era, magazines were very localized. I mean, you had a completely different audience and a completely different style and different people that featured in magazines in the UK versus America, for example. And we had, you could say local celebrities. I mean, we mentioned a few of them before, like, Jazz Rignall and, Steve Jarrett and guys like Stuart Campbell, live him or hate him. They were well known back in the day. I mean, what about you, Dean? Before you got into writing, when you were reading, these magazines like Crash and stuff, were there any kind of writers that you looked up to, and did you have any favourites?
Yeah. I mean, there was, I remember Gary Penn being quite a prominent figure in a lot of them. Chris Anderson, obviously, who went on to set up Future, was on it at that point. Jazz, I didn't know he was on Crash, but I remember the name cropping up. Richard Eddy was one guy that I remember seeing quite a bit of in the mags, and of course, when I started on Sega Power, he worked in marketing for Codemasters for a number of years, so I got to meet him. That's quite bizarre. And another guy from your Sinclair, I used to read a lot of, was somebody called Phil South, who actually contacted me recently about writing for Sega Power. So that was quite weird, because I was like, oh my god, I used to read your, so I had a bit of a kind of fanboy moment, but that was quite bizarre. There's lots of really great writers then, and there's a lot of them still working and still writing.
It's interesting because sometimes, without even reading the byline of who wrote it, you could tell sometimes. You'd be like, oh, I bet this is one of their articles. You turn back and you'd be like, yep. You kind of got to know their style, didn't you, when you read them every month?
Absolutely. And that's something we're keen to promote in Sega Power, because we're all very different and we all have our own style. I mean, Neil's style is very different to mine and to Neil's and Mark's. So we really want to kind of push that, so people eventually get used to the tone, and then they get used to saying, oh, well, that game's been reviewed by Mark and I know he likes that type of game, so blah, blah, blah. So that's what we want to obviously promote, which is very much kind of the mag feel.
I know you're friends with most of them now, Paul. I mean, I don't want to embarrass you or anything. Was there anyone who's kind of your hero when you were growing up?
Well, like you said, I've made friends with quite a few people that I used to read, which it still blows my mind. I've still got a few people that sadly have not been able to quite talk about getting on in the past. So myself and Dean, obviously, we've mentioned Andy Dyer, from his days on Total and Mega. There's obviously the late Jason Brooks. He spent time on Superplay, then Edge. Again, people like Neil West. These are, as you just touched on, some of these went on to go and, work in America on American magazines. It's great to see how their careers sort of progressed and also how their styles had to change as well, because some of these people like Gary Whitta, I've just come to him, but like he's done extremely well since writing on games magazines, and you think about it, and like he was saying, his writing style had to change so much when he went working on the American ones compared to the British ones, the language used and everything like that, and how people viewed certain genres. So, like I say, the key ones are, I've just mentioned, but I think everyone had their own styles, like Dean just said. I think that's one of the key things. And already, I mean, I keep joking, like in our group chat with Dean and the guys, anytime it's a racing game, there's probably only about 3 or 4 racing games I like at all. So, when we have to discuss and give another opinion for the racing ones, it's usually me going, I suppose it's all right, and like, I don't know, the rest of them will absolutely love it, but I'm sure we'll get to, viewpoints like that at some point.
Well, back in the days, in the 90s, there would be some controversies going around because I'd always try and get the edge. What controversies do you remember, Paul, that really stood out for you?
I'm just trying to think, really, because back then it's obviously trying to get all the exclusives and everything. Some stories have been shared with me, like off air, which I've stuck to my, code, as to put it, and never shared them. But I think, when you see things like, well, Ian mentioned Amiga Action before, and when you have a look at, say, when they gave things like Rise of the Robots on Amiga, 90-odd%, and every single magazine must have rated it 30% or lower. You sort of wonder what's going on there, and then you do sometimes like hear that obviously some publishers will try and say, would you be a bit more favourable? I'm not saying that happened, people actually took up on it, but it's just those are the big things that stood out for me, like when one magazine gives a game that looks a bit, suspect, such a high score, and everyone else is unanimous in slating it, it does make you wonder, I remember once speaking to Dave Perry. I know you guys spoke to him as well, but like he was on about trying to get exclusives for, I think he said Mortal Kombat 2. It may have been Sega Pro, and he just said how underhand it was, to try and get in by, not lying about deadlines, but, I've got like a week's lead on here, and, having to try and get that scoop that little bit quicker, or this, I'm sure like Dean will have heard things, but when sometimes be reviewing games that are not fully complete, certain titles, and that's why a lot of mags back then would be like going, we will only review games which are fully 100% complete. So at the end of the day, people who are, mainly kids and teenagers, back then you're spending, what, 45 quid a game, for consoles, and even on something like Amiga, it's still £30 if you were buying Amiga games. And yeah, it's quite a bit of pocket money back then, or, a little bit of your wage. So you wanted to make sure you were buying something good. So I think that comes back to knowing which writers you could trust, and also agree with, their taste in games.
Obviously, Dean, you were right in the middle of that, at Sega Power, for example. I mean, do you remember any kind of examples of, like software companies? Did they kind of do that to get favourable reviews, or any kind of pressure they put on? Was there anything like that sticks in your memory?
The usual one was, because we talk a lot about review scores in Sega Powered, because obviously we have a lot less, we have to be a lot, we don't have PR people breathing down our necks so much, but the way it used to work was they wanted at least 80% or above for a review, because they worked out the cut-off point with buyers. If anything below 80%, used to turn people off. Even if it was 78, they'd be like, oh. If it was 80 or 81, psychologically, they thought it was a much better game. So they'd always say, well, we want 80%. So very often what would happen is, in a similar way that some films aren't press screened because they're not particularly good. If a game's a bit iffy, they'll say, oh, well, the review code isn't ready. And damn well it is, because they have to send it off to be mastered. And it has to go approval process and all that kind of thing. So it's being done. But you say, oh, yeah, well, we'll get it to you. And when's your deadline? Oh, yeah, we might not get it to you in time. So they'll deliberately kind of slow things down so you didn't get it in time. And you have to review it after it was out in the shops. Or they would say, well, we want 80%. If you're going to review this and you're going to be one of the first, then we need this sort of score. And if you said, well, no, we can't do that, then they'll say, oh, well, okay, well, we'll have to leave it then. And whether or not that's underhand, I don't know. But we always very firm and stuck to our guns in every aspect, because it's just, if you start going down that route, and to be honest, I know a couple of games when I've looked at it, I thought, oh, I'm not sure about that. But I would never presume that that's what they did. But once you do start going down the road, people aren't stupid, and they do go, well, hold on, that's not a such and such a percentage, that's more like that. And if you lose the confidence of your readers and the people buying the mag, then you're done for, really.
Yeah, I think, when we were talking to Steve Jarrett, he mentioned something about, when it was Edge magazine, they give a game a bad review, and then the publisher pulled all their advertising for a couple of months, in rebellion, and then kind of came around a couple of months later. But I guess it must have been a bit of a kind of balancing act commercially, but also keeping the integrity as well sometimes.
Well, it was, but also in those days before the internet, if you wanted to publicise a game, there was only really one way to do it. So it was kind of a very much a mutual collaborative thing. It's because the software companies needed the magazines as much as anything else to promote their titles. So advertising was a lot more of an essential thing then.
Did you hear, it just reminded me, like what Dean was just saying about, and yourself, about advertising, being pulled, because like one of the stories that was told to me was Tim Ponting when he was on PC Zone, and he had a disagreement over, I can't remember if it was something like Command and Conquer, some big title, and Virgin threatened to pull the advertising, and the story, and this made it into the interview that I did with him, because I kept it in because I was like, my God, what a story this is. And because this disagreement went on with Virgin and PC Zone, he sent an axe to the main guy at Virgin by courier, and saying, don't you think it's time to bury this? And it was like, oh my God, as in bury the hatchet. And I was just like in awe of this story, that Tim Ponting had just told me. I thought, this is amazing. So, I'd like to think not everything went that crazy.
That's the thing. We're thinking about, controversies in magazines. I mean, Ravi mentioned one before we recorded today. I always remember the, cannon fodder on the front cover of Amiga Power, with the poppy and that making, I think it was in like the Sun or something, wasn't it?
Sun, Daily Mail, and all those other favourites. Again, I think we just put it down as like disrespectful or something, because obviously the magazines will have picked up on it, because again, this was around the time when you're thinking like, what, 93, 94, where it was any publicity against games. If it was bad publicity, we'd be all over it. Nintendo causes epilepsy, things like that. And the magazines such as Games Master, Total, whoever, would always comment and just go, well, this national newspaper has reported this. We know that our readers are sensible. And it's just like, the video nasties craze of the 80s. If you have a look at what's, I can't believe I say this, new and hip. And, I'm so sorry. Look, I'm 42. I promise you I'm not 60 odd. I'm just, but yeah, it's just one of those things, sadly. There always seems to be that public enemy number one, and games like Cannon Fodder, because, we were saying, oh, it's a bit, damning against the war, veterans and things like that. And, you've spoke to so many people from Sensible, and, they've said otherwise.
Well, sorry, I was going to jump in quickly. If you remember in the issue, the problem wasn't so much of the cover, which wasn't completely disrespectful, is that Stuart Campbell wrote, "Old soldiers, I wish them all dead." That's what upset them. Because if you remember on Amiga Power, they all had a little Stuart says, Cam says, and Stuart says, "Old soldiers, I wish them all dead." And of course, predictably there was an uproar, and I remember because I was working at Future, I think at the time then, and the tabloids were literally banging down the door of the Amiga Power office trying to get in, and they wouldn't open the door to them. They kept Stuart locked in until they went away.
Of course, Team 17 and Amiga Power went on to have a bit of a disagreement themselves over like review scores and things like that. And it makes you wonder whether that happening earlier on around cannon fodder to kind of help to spark those sort of feelings of discord kind of thing.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah.
Dean, do you want to share the? We can always just not do, but
God.
The Sega Power being banned by Pizza Hut, upsetting Pizza Hut, wasn't it? With the
oh god, that was basically the publisher very cleverly worked out that if we dumped a load of copies of Sega Power at Pizza Hut on the last issue of our ABC, then that sort of boosted the figures a little bit. So basically what would happen was if kids went into any of the Pizza Hut restaurants, they were given a copy of Sega Power to read as they were having their meal. So apparently that still counted as towards the ABC, so they were quite happy. Anyway, the language wasn't risky that at all really in Sega Power, but there was some throwaway line about that somebody had written, which was kind of jokey, about some girl's bikini falling off, and apparently the kids were giggling, and the mum read it and got upset and complained to the papers, and then it was in the the Today newspaper, which was obviously a paper from a while back, and yeah, we were hauled over the coals for that. But yeah, it was very odd. But I think the headline was Pizza Hut hands out sex tales to teenagers, which is...
And you know exactly what that every teenager then's like, I want to read that magazine.
The ABCs went through the roof.
Yeah, it was it's quite bizarre, really. But...
Well, magazines kind of went a bit out of trend, and do you think the internet was to blame for a lot of this, Ian?
Definitely. I mean, some of the things we've had to consider from that perspective in Amiga Addict is a lot of the focus for magazines back in the 90s would be, I've got to be first, got to get the exclusive. That's where you'd get some of these reviews of games that weren't quite finished, getting in there and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, print magazines nowadays, you've got no chance of competing against the internet. You can't expect to. You might get the odd exclusive just because no one knows, but you're never going to beat someone just typing up a tweet or a blog or anything, getting it onto the internet. So definitely that immediacy of information, it was definitely probably didn't help magazines. Definitely media, newspapers, all those sorts of things became less of a focus for people because they could get their information elsewhere and potentially get their information from people who might agree with them more than maybe a magazine reviewer or an editorial writer might do as well. So yeah, definitely the internet's going to have had a massive effect. I mean, you can definitely see the parallels between when the internet was starting to get big in the mid-90s and when magazines went out of fashion. But obviously, a lot of games magazines will follow the life cycles of the platform they're supporting as well. So a lot of the magazines we know and love from back in the day will have gone along those sorts of life cycles. But equally, you can say, well, you're not seeing a new like a Xbox Series X magazine necessarily, or they're not filling the shelves anymore, certainly.
I guess the need for demo discs and cover CDs as well was a huge thing. Dean, you were working in the industry. Did you kind of see the rise of the internet and see how it affected and changed stuff?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Ian was completely right. That's exactly what happened. I mean, when the internet started off and the games news sites started popping up, I mean, generally they were just kind of run by people in their bedroom. But obviously, the more money that was available for these sites, they were able to hire more professional writers and professional designers. So it wasn't long before editorially they were competing with the better mags. So as soon as people realised they can get this information weeks earlier online, then that kind of made a lot of what the magazines did redundant, I think.
I mean, were you there at the time when FutureNet was originally being set up? That was about 95, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was set up by Andy, or one of the team was Andy Smith, the Sega Power editor that I started with. And I think, it was kind of small steps and all that. And I think nobody really knew what to do with the internet because not many people had access, and the access was kind of intermittent, and we were all on dial-up then. It was all a bit patchy. Obviously, they had to have a presence online, but it was a bit kind of not really sure what they were doing, kind of suck it and see, really. But
yeah, I remember then it was generally just the dump a few kind of old articles online, wouldn't they, from like a few months back?
But that's it, and you couldn't really do many screenshots because you'd sit there and watch the lines load, wouldn't you? And it would take about a minute to load anything remotely resembling something you could watch, or at least look at. So it was mainly editorial, I think. But so then the magazine obviously was still kind of, still supreme. But as soon as broadband came along, and obviously things sped up, then it was like, oh, okay, that's kind of it.
Yeah, I think when you started getting online video becoming a new thing, you can actually see these games rather than just have to look at screenshots and imagine how they move, or play a demo, for example. That's going to make a big difference to what people's expectations are.
Well, you saw that massive change, didn't you? Like mid-noughties, like you saw quite a few magazines on the shelves, but so many were starting to get a bit thinner. And like you just said, that when broadband came along, you didn't need the demo discs. That just seemed to be like, I think we still kept him for the early days of official like PlayStation 3 magazine, but then we soon got rid of them, because like say you just go on to PlayStation Store or whatever and just download a demo there, and eventually you sort of get conditioned to not expect it after God knows how many years of demo discs, going back to like say those Amiga and ST days. That's how they obviously sold the games. And like you say, now you just go onto a website and all the pictures are there, video and everything. It's just constant. So I think that's why when you are doing a magazine now, it's trying to do things different, because it's not going to be the same as, or then you look at ways to obviously be better than, as well. But I'm sure we'll get onto that.
Well, since the kind of days of tapes, people would survive off those demo discs.
Oh, yeah.
Cover discs. They were a huge resource. And Ian, I know Amiga Addict have actually tried to release a few cover discs, which is interesting in today's age.
It was a challenge because obviously a lot of the expectations people have for magazines like Amiga Addict and Sega Power is influenced by people's experience of the magazines back in the day. So they obviously they want to see you push new boundaries, but they also want to get the nostalgia from what they had back in the day. So the articles and the features that you get back in the day, classifieds and letters pages and all those kinds of things are things people want to see. And one of those things is the cover discs. Now, obviously, if you're doing an Amiga magazine, then sourcing 1,000+ floppy disks in modern age is basically impossible. So it's doable, but it would probably cost more than the production of the magazine itself. And plus, magazines back in the day had a dedicated cover disc editor, and they'd spend their time sourcing the licenses and sourcing the material to put on the discs. And obviously, with all of us, most of us working part-time on the magazine, just don't have time for that kind of thing. But we've managed to get a nice middle ground in that we provide a download, which is effectively a virtual disc. So people that know the Amiga format, no pun intended, know that you can get basically a virtual disc format. So we can provide that file for download from our website. But then, this was Jonah's idea, we go that extra step and we print their labels, so people can actually take that virtual disc, put it onto a real physical floppy disk, maybe overwriting an old magazine floppy disk that they had from back in the day, and then they can stick their new label over the top, and people seem to really like that. That's been going pretty well because we can track the downloads, and people are definitely downloading those cover discs and enjoying them.
It is nice to see you guys doing a cover disc, actually, because that was a big part of it back then. I've got memories of also Christmas issues of stuff like Amiga Format seem to have the most incredible cover discs. I remember getting Lemmings 2 demo on there for the first time, and there was Cannon Soccer, which was a great little Christmas demo of Cannon Fodder and Sensible Soccer. Have you got any kind of favourite cover discs that stick in your mind, Paul?
Well, you just mentioned the Cannon Soccer then, and when a cover disc does it right, like Ravi said, sometimes you would just be getting hours and hours of, fun from it. And sometimes it just seemed to be, like a couple of PD games, public domain things. Again, mentioning Amiga Action, for example, I think they were the first Amiga magazine to have the 4 discs on the cover, and they had to have slightly thicker paper because obviously if it had been the same thickness of the cover, it just ripped, through the sheer weight of 4 cover discs. But that I've wrote about for Amiga Addict in the past, those cover disc wars were absolutely fantastic, for readers. It must have been horrible for the magazine staff to go, okay, we've got 2 cover discs, well done, guys. Oh no, Amiga Power have got 3 now. Okay, can we do 4 then? And before you know it, it's just like a magazine of discs. But some of them were so.
Do you remember as well? They used to compress them, and you needed about like 7 blank floppies sometimes to archive them all.
Yes,
yeah.
now a lot more in my ST owning days. And again, as we've established even this evening, my technical skills aren't always the best. So when you're reading like the disc pages of, say, ST Format or ST Action, and you're just going, okay, I've got to do this, and I need a blank disc to do that, and I'm just, I was only 10 or 11 at the time with the ST, and I'm going, this just seems so long-winded. Why can't I just put in disc, play game, Yeah, it's just, I think, moving forward a few years, things like the PlayStation cover discs, official PlayStation magazine, they had the NetYazori demos, games that people have made as well. Absolutely fantastic. I remember things like Resident Evil 2 demo, and you'd just be like, oh my God, this is amazing. It was still like such a magical time. And I think we just pulled out all the stops. It became a proper cover disc war, for quite a few years.
Well, Dean, obviously working on Sega Power, which, for, I guess, the early part of it was really focused on the Mega Drive, which was mostly a cartridge-based machine. I remember they did like a one-off Mega CD cover mount on Sega Power. I mean, was there ever any... Did you do like Saturn stuff as well? What was kind of your memory of doing any cover-mounted stuff?
When we rebranded the magazine as Saturn Power, I wanted to do a covered disc on every issue. And part of the publisher said, okay, well, yeah, you can do that, but get me a year's worth of discs all sorted out and you can do it. So I did that. I got a year's worth of third-party discs sorted out and took it to publisher. Said, okay, well, these are all confirmed. This is what we got for each month. Unfortunately, between that point and the first couple of issues coming out, the Saturn died horrendously. So basically, all those third-party games that were agreed to go on suddenly cancelled. So we started okay. We had I think one issue, we had a core demo disc with a few titles on it. Then we had a Gremlin one with a few. Then we did a music one because one dropped out. And then eventually we had Wipeout. And then that was it, really. But, the idea was there and the kind of the support was there initially. But I think we weren't predicting the Saturn to die quite as quickly as it did. We always knew it was going to be kind of second fiddle to the PlayStation, but I think we kind of secretly hoped that it would be like the sort of Xbox and PlayStation, that one would be slightly above the other one, but it would all be okay in the end. But obviously it wasn't. Sadly not.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the new magazines then. So obviously, Dean, you're working on Amiga Powered. And I know, Paul, you straddle both Amiga Addict and Sega Powered. You got, your feet in both kind of camps there. And Ian, like we mentioned, you're the deputy editor on Amiga Addict. I mean, so let's just kind of, you might be a good place to start actually with this, Paul. Give me the kind of synopsis on both of these magazines for people that haven't read them before.
Okay. I'm going to end up saying the usual thing, which also just makes Dean roll his eyes. But the idea, what I've also said to Jonah as well, my thinking has always been, we started magazines because both scenes are strong currently. For the Amiga and also things like the Sega Dreamcast, this is probably the most fruitful era, gaming-wise, publicity-wise, and things like that. So I always say it's like we cover the past, present, and future of, Amiga and also Sega, because for a magazine to survive, you obviously need to still be having things to cover, using, say, Retro Gamer quickly as an example. that's never going to run out of things to cover because, every few years something else becomes classed as retro or vintage or however you want to see it. But I think like when it comes, say, using Sega at the moment, so you think you've got over 30 years of games to look back on, so obviously we cover things like Master System. We have an issue too, a look back at some really rare Sega hardware. And then when you think, Mega Drive, Saturn, Dreamcast, and you think it's 20 years since the Dreamcast was, dropped by Sega, so it's like a retro machine. But then you've always had some people, making games to it, doing ports and things. But, at the moment, we're talking like getting on for a dozen different games, being worked on, released. Some are ports, some are original games. Again, you've got things like Mega Drive games being worked on as well. Going over to the Amiga, again, Ian will totally agree with me on this, but the amount of, and yourself, Ravi, the amount of games that are coming out and being reworked on the Amiga, with this Scorpion engine is absolutely amazing. I mean, you guys have mentioned, Final Fight's being redone. You've got a couple of other scrolling beat 'em ups. You've had Metal Gear being ported to the Amiga. And I keep saying to both teams, it's like, it's almost like those late days for the Amiga. It's almost like 1996, 97. When I go through my Amiga magazines from that period, and say there's 5 or 6 reviews, we're getting close to that again. The amount of things that are in work in progress is crazy. So you think you've got all this to cover. With the A500 Mini, you're going to see that like in Game, Argos, whatever. I'm trying to not make it sound like an advert, but it's mad to show that, there's some people that are just going to say, wow, there's, some, well, not exactly Amiga hardware, but, the Amiga name is going to be back on the high street for, well, who knows how long. But yeah, it's really, really interesting. It really is. And I would say it's the strongest these scenes have been for quite some years, hence now obviously wanted to write about them. And, again, have that bit of a look back. It's exciting times.
Well, I think for us as the people in this on this podcast that are probably deep in the community and understand everything that's coming out, for a lot of people that only have a passing glance at these sorts of scenes, they just I've lost track of the number of times someone's come up to me and said, I had no idea people were still making Amiga games anymore, or people were still making Amiga hardware. And that's where these magazines can really benefit people that might not be on social media all hours of the day or following fan sites and things like that, just to get a view of what's out there and what's coming up.
Well, the internet kind of seemed to damage magazines, but it's absolutely helped magazines at the moment, because I know we've been working collaboratively online, Ian and Paul.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for the last 10 issues. So what tools have been absolutely essential in the production of a magazine?
I mean, Discord is a big one for us, but really any kind of platform where you can just get together with people and talk things out. I mean, we've been saying since issue 1 we need to get into a regular sort of voice chat or something on Discord, and we still haven't managed to do it because actually producing content tends to come first. But it just being able to set up a few private channels with just the people that you want to talk to and get that instant response from people really helps, because obviously producing a magazine, traditionally everyone's sat together in an office. They can just lean across and ask a question or push a bit of content back to someone, and we just don't have the options for that, because I mean,
well, in the pandemic we actually hadn't physically met up. No. So it was all kind of done online, and I think Google Docs is also absolutely fabulous resource. What Dean, what are you using to kind of help produce a magazine online?
Well, we will talk on. We've got a Facebook group chat for the 4 of us, and it was something we set up at the start, just for a kind of way for us all to talk, and that's just it. That's all we've kept. We're on Discord as well. That was something that we set up relatively recently. when we had the time to kind of do it, because it's just a nice way that if people kind of want to kind of chat to us, they know that if they kind of ask us a question or they want to have a chat, one of us will usually get back to them within a kind of half an hour. So it's sort of straddling both worlds really, and creating an analog product in a digital age, because you can use the internet for positive things and use it to kind of help the magazine progress really. I mean, things like marketing of it, I mean, something that we would never be able to afford to do traditionally, whereas nowadays, you know, with things like Kickstarter and Twitter and Facebook, you can obviously promote things a lot easier and get the word out.
And as well, I think that's great, the fact that you're so accessible as well, because I remember, you know, reading Amiga format, you know, in the early 90s, and they'd be like, you know, we'll open the phone lines on Tuesday morning if you want to call and ask something, but that's it. But now you can contact you on Discord, like you said, get a reply in half an hour. It's, you know, I guess it makes it a lot more friendly for readers.
It's a blessing and a curse, let me tell you.
You know, while we're talking about the production, I've got to ask Sissy, and because, you know, Amiga Addict, I've got the latest copy in front of me here. Glossy cover, it's full colour, you know, it looks beautiful. It's got, you know, that real professional look. You mad lads actually put all this together on an Amiga.
We did.
How does this work?
I think, Jonah has an X5000, which is kind of a sort of later day next gen kind of Amiga, and he initially put together the first magazine on PageStream, which is an Amiga DTP program, and we're probably not 100% on Amiga anymore, just because we've got more team members and we've got to produce things quicker for the best will in the world. Moving files between Amiga and PC and off the internet and all these sorts of things is hard work. But yeah, I mean, there's still parts of the magazine we do completely on the Amiga. It's something we wanted to try and keep as much as we could, because, you know, it's demonstrating the power of the platform, isn't it, really? So.
But even back then, I mean, I've seen videos of Futures offices. They use Macs for everything. You know, even the Amiga's heyday, no one used it to make a magazine. So very ambitious. And what about for you, Dean? So, I mean, I'm looking here then. So I've got Sega Power issue 1 and 2. So, and this looks, I mean, it is something that, you know, it's the quality of anything you'd see in WHSmith or something like that. It's incredible. You know, the paper quality feels gorgeous as well. And what's kind of the process of putting this together then? And does it kind of feel a bit like being back in the saddle after all this time, you know, editing a Sega mag again?
Do you know what? It feels lovely. I mean, I've done some really good jobs over the last 20 or so years, but doing something like this, it's just, yes, it's gorgeous. It's really lovely. It just feels like the last 20 years have just disappeared, really. It's my midlife crisis, a little bit older. But yeah, we do it all on Macs. We do it all with InDesign. So just before this, for about 6 or 7 years, I produced local free magazines that went around the community, sort of the thing you get through the door. So that were free and funded by advertising. So kind of myself and my partner, who's a graphic designer, we kind of put them together ourselves. So we kind of had that set up in place and the structure. So this is a bigger magazine, obviously, and so the workload's increased, but the structure's still kind of the same. So my partner Kate handles a lot of the design. I do some of the pages that I can do, but all the kind of the stuff that looks really nice, like the features, I leave to her. But luckily, with InDesign and a decent computer, powerful computer, it's pretty quick nowadays.
Do you ever, you know, so obviously you've got to think of content regularly when you're working on these titles. I mean, for example, Paul, I mean, do you ever sit there and you're like, you know, I've got a couple of articles to write this month?
Well, like you said, like Dean said, we originally sat down and just started knocking about a few ideas and put a few things down on an Excel type spreadsheet, you know, with well, I'd like to cover this, I'd like to cover that. And we did the same with Amiga Addict as well. But sometimes things just go out the window, because all it takes is the few times where we've met up, you know, or you just start chatting, or, you know, the odd time when you have like an hour, the odd time, you know, where all of us are talking, you know, on Discord or whatever, and you go, oh, you know, what's a good idea, this, or I've been playing such a game, can we like have a look at the history of this or whatever? And like, I'm sure we all have experienced, you've got to make sure that the content isn't going to look too out of place in a particular issue. For example, if you spoke to Jonah, the amount of time things do get jigged around a little bit, where he's like, yeah, I'll put it in here. He goes, no, actually, it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the magazine or whatever. In regards to Dean, we start having ideas as soon as we start getting towards the close of a current issue, just as, that proofing and getting ready to be sent away. You've got a few ideas in your mind going, well, Dean, I'm thinking about this. What do you reckon? And then, within probably the next day at the latest, you're back to us, Dean, going, yeah, go for it, or just go into a bit of detail, tell us what you're actually thinking and we'll have a look at it. And again, because obviously he's got tons of experience, I'm learning a lot, and that's absolutely fantastic. Some things are dead small, but then I still remember, as I hold my hands up here, the first review I did for Dean was for Monkey Island on Mega CD, and it's having that, discipline. And he goes, right, you're looking at about 450 words, something like that. And I think I did about 900. And, straight away, he sent it back and he just went, okay, yeah, I like it. I can see the passion, but you just need to cut it down a bit. And I was just like, message back, how much? About 400 words. I remember him just going, oh God, how am I going to cut out 400 words?
That was like your introduction.
Well, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm getting better. The more I'm doing, because obviously now I'm getting to know obviously what, Dean wants and everything like that. And it's fun. It really, really is fun. I mean, I'm still, there's a review of, I may as well say, Dean, via Clockwork Aquario in issue 2. We spent about an hour as a team discussing, the rating for that game. And because I think I liked it a bit more, and then we had like a massive discussion over Messenger, over value for money, things like that, and was it a fun game, and would you give scores for this, would you give scores for that? Well, you can't give it that high if it only takes half an hour to complete, and this went on for a good hour. And then it was like, right guys, let me have a think about it, and I was like, right, okay, I've taken it all on board, I'm going to go for this, and it's good because things are discussed as a team, like again, when we do the re-reviews, and not in every single one, but when we're all giving our opinion, that never really gets tampered with, because obviously it's your opinion, like the little talking heads. And it's just nice. It really, really is, learning a lot here. And through that, that's when the ideas start to come, because you're learning those new skills, like say age 42 now. And, this is what I wanted to do when I was a teenager. And, to see my words in print. Sorry, this is more of a sign off, but yeah, it's just fantastic.
Well, Ian, we've kind of seen some amazing commercial interest in the magazine. And, a lot of people really reliant on advertising in the magazine industry. How have advertisers and retailers kind of reacted to what would be seen as a real niche?
It's been a bit crazy, to be quite honest. I mean, and I give a lot of credit here to Jonah's other half, Hannah, who's our kind of advertising manager. But we've got people advertising in the magazine that are producing current Amiga hardware or have a current shop. We've also got people like Computer Exchange, CEX, who are regularly advertise with us, which is for us is a huge get kind of thing. Just to see people wanting to advertise in there, and it really helps our content as well, because that nostalgia factor I mentioned before. Some people largely have a nostalgia even for the adverts you used to get in magazines, sort of going down your mail order lists and seeing what's out this month. So being able to see new adverts in the magazine, people have said to us, it's great to see adverts in the magazine, which seems like completely backwards from a kind of a capitalist consumerism kind of perspective, but it's part of what people remember and what people love about magazines.
You need those fast adverts in there.
Oh, yeah, that's it. You wouldn't download a car.
Yeah. Also, you've got a bit of news about Amiga Addict going into a retail space as well.
Absolutely. That's kind of our biggest news at the moment. I mean, since issue 1, really, Jonah's been talking about whether we could get the magazine onto the shelves. Because I mean, for us, old as we are, we can remember going into your WHSmith or going to your John Menzies or whatever it was and picking up your magazine directly off the shelf. And we've just signed a retail deal to get the magazine stocked in around 300 locations around the country. So it'll be in things like Smiths and all other news agents. It'll be in train stations and airports and all these things. It's going to be crazy for me just wandering around going, I wrote some of that and it's on the shelf. So yeah, it's really big news for us, and I think it helps certainly people in the UK that might not want to pay the price of a magazine and then also pay the extra postage on top when they could just wander into the shop and pick it up themselves. So I'm hoping that'll be good news for all round, really.
That's a big vote of confidence as well, having like the UK's leading news agent putting you on their shelf.
Absolutely. I mean, we definitely had to be at a certain level, and we definitely need to tighten up our our schedules to make sure that we meet, because now we have deadlines to work to and all those sorts of things, just to keep the retailers happy and all those sorts of things. But no, it's a big vote of confidence that we were able to get that agreement made, and we'll see how it goes. So I mean, look out in your local news agents, and you'll be able to request it when you used to get those little slips of paper in the back of Smiths or whatever. Say, I want to get my copy of Amiga Addict stocked in my local store. You'll be able to do all that kind of stuff as well. So
you used to have a little form that you could rip out the magazine, didn't you? That you could fill in and give to your news agent.
I was having that discussion with Jonah just the other day. We might be doing that. So.
Oh, wow. Oi, Newsy. Save my magazine.
Well, I mean, obviously the retro gaming magazine market right now is really healthy. I mean, we've got other stuff like Old School Gamer Mag. We've got Chris Wilkins doing his Fusion and Zap 64 Revival and Crash as well. And obviously Retro Gamer that comes out every month. So it feels like it's in a really good place right now. And it's amazing to see you guys doing such quality products as well. I mean, Dean, tell us what's coming up in Sega Powered then. I mean, is issue 3 on the way soon? What can we kind of expect next?
Yes. Yeah, we're kind of part of the way through that one now. We kind of, because we had the second one ready for Doncaster show last weekend. So that was good. But we're very aware that, deadlines creep up ever so quickly. We are trying to stick it to a monthly schedule. But what's interesting, actually, going back to what somebody was saying earlier, is the amount of, you kind of think, oh, God, are we going to be straggling around for features here? But there's so much going on still in the whole Sega community. And there's so much new stuff being developed that there's much higher percentage of kind of new things that we're covering that I didn't think we would have, which is great. But we're just, to give you an idea of what we've got in the next one, we've got an interview with Paul Davis, who people will know from things like CMVG and things like that. We've got a big cover feature on Shenmue, which is the classic Yu Suzuki game with that broke a lot of boundaries with things like open world games and story games and kind of the whole life cycle and the day to night cycle, and really created a game that you can live. So we're going to kind of a proper look at that, but we're getting some guys who really know the game to help us with the feature because they're kind of experts. So we're kind of bringing them in. Gosh, we got all sorts of weird and wonderful things. We're looking at things like Japanese to Western translations of games, things that were missed out from Japanese translations when they brought to the West. We've got something on the Master System in Brazil, looking at that, and some of the games that, again, were released only over there. And we've got a few new, brand new games to review and loads of other things as well.
Well, SegaPowered.com is a website if people want to check it out and get hold of a copy of it. I'll put that in our show notes as well.
Thank you.
And obviously, we've got Amiga Addict issue 11 on the way. Ian, what can we expect from that?
So it's a good time to ask, really, because it's of course, the new Amiga Mini is coming out soon. So we're getting a review unit of that coming along, so we can kind of give people a view of what the hardware's like, whether it works particularly well or what they can expect from it. We've got all our kind of regular features around the sort of creative software. We've got the second part of our CinemaWare feature. Mm-hmm. We've got some interviews with Amiga Power and the people that used to work on that. View of the Buffy project for the sort of cheap accelerators for the Amiga. So we've got all sorts of things. I mean, I'm scrolling down our spreadsheet right now, just pulling out. I can't remember these things, but yeah, it's we've got loads of stuff coming up, and we're already planned out for the next few months as well.
Well, that's AmigaAddict.com or hopefully in a branch of WHSmith near you very soon as well. So,
Absolutely.
Jens, it's been an absolute pleasure, not only reminiscing, but also talking about your incredible new magazines as well. Long may it continue, and we really appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.